Okay, I am so excited that God of War is now on the PC. However, the system requirements officially state that the GTX 1060, which is the GPU I have here, should only be good for 1080p 30 frames per second at the original PS4 settings, which sounds way too low to me. So we're definitely going to test that out here. So the settings here are at 1080p, and we're at the original settings, and then we'll also play around with some other settings and frame rates, and we'll see if we can get some optimized settings. But I have a feeling that we're going to do way better than 30 FPS, and what they meant by that is they just can't guarantee that it's going to be a locked 60 FPS experience. As you can see right here, in this cutscene, we're hovering around 50 FPS, going a little bit below that here. Now, cutscenes don't really matter. By the way, the rest of my system here is very high-end, much higher end than you would expect on a GTX 1060. So, you also might want to think about your CPU requirements, although from my understanding, since this is originally a PS4 game, the CPU requirements shouldn't be too crazy or anything like that. Anyway, so in this cutscene, it's looking like we are, I guess it's not officially a cutscene now. I can actually click on the axe, axe and hit some things. Yeah, around 50 FPS. So my initial thought here is we are way above the 30 that they, advertised, going over 60 here. But I think what they really meant was just that you couldn't lock 60. So their options were 30 or 60, assuming that you don't have a variable refresh rate monitor. So speaking of that, I would say that if you do have a variable refresh rate monitor, nothing about the frame rate so far suggests to me that we should go below this. 50 FPS and dropping into the upper 40s seems pretty fine to me. Although I'm sure there's ways that we could tweak it. For example, I can already tell you that this game does feature under the display settings DLSS, which we don't have. FSR doesn't look too great at 1080p, but also has render scaling, which I have confirmed is a TAA-based render scaler, which means I could probably go down to a 90% res scale here, and you're not going to really be able to see much difference, but the frame rates are going to bump up significantly. Right? So there's a 90% res scale. Notice that we're now up in the mid-50s. So I think a little bit of a res scale could help us significantly in this game. I'm curious again if I shift that back off, if you're able to really tell much of a difference. So if we go back up to 100%, I doubt you're really going to be able to see much of a difference, although notice that the frame rate dropped down into the lower to mid-40s now. So, pretty significant differences just based on that. Now, I'm hoping it gets us some actual gameplay here pretty soon. I played this on the PS4, but that was a long time ago. I never actually finished it. I'm excited to actually finish it here on the PC. Frame time graph looks pretty smooth. So one nice thing about this game being in DX11, which you can tell in the top left corner, D3D11, not 12, is that we're not going to get a lot of the stuttering issues that are common
Still want me to tie it to the boat?
On a lot of recent games. So a lot of recent games have DX12 related asset loading stutters, and I'm not seeing that happen here, which is definitely good news. Right. By the way, everything looks really great at the original.
That is enough.
At the original PS4 settings. Now the PS4 actually even struggled to always maintain 30 FPS. Some heavier scenes would even drop down into like around 28 FPS, that type of thing.
Did something change?
So down into the 40s here.
Everything is different, boy.
So what I want to play with now that we actually have the option, where are my graphics settings? So I can open my menu. Where's my graphics settings? Escape key maybe? There we go. All right, so in this scene, again, look, we're down into the 40s, so I'm curious what we can do about that. So it's definitely looking like original doesn't get us, that. So we can go down to low. So the settings are low, original, high, and ultra. And then you can do some custom mix. So original basically being the medium settings. Now let's go down to low and just check in this scene, does that get us up to 60 FPS? It doesn't look like it does. Also, things do look noticeably worse to me here, flipping between them. This still looks like playable. Okay, we're at 49 FPS. Let's switch back to the original settings and check the difference. Okay, down to 43. So that was what, a 6 FPS difference? I can tell some difference in the quality of the shadows and reflections and such. Not a huge bump going down to low, so I'm not sure that's going to be worth it. Let's go ahead and try out, like I said, there's also this render scaling. So let's try out, we can try out FSR. So you know what? I would never go below Ultra Quality at 1080p unless you really needed the frame rate, but let's just see how it does. You're definitely losing a lot of detail. I don't like using this on 1080p games. I just feel like you don't have enough resolution for it to really be worth it. I see a lot of fuzzing now in the details, the characters' faces, things like that. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of FSR at 1080p. I like it a lot at 4K, and it's reasonable at 1440p. So I'm probably not going to use that. We could try out the render scaling, and maybe even try going down to like an 80% res scale. This is using a TAA, so we do get the motion vector data that FSR doesn't. And that looks to get a similar performance to what FSR did. Might look a little bit better to me, but honestly not hugely different. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like, at least in this scene, which admittedly I think is a pretty difficult one with the water and reflections and shadows and all that, it's looking like in order to hit 60 FPS, we would have to both use a res scale and probably go down to low settings. Let's see how that does. Alright, so it's looking like an 80% res scale, along with going down to the low settings, does seem to hit 60 FPS. Now, there's nothing magic about 60, and notice that our frame rate is getting a lot better here as we get out of that scene. So another option, by the way, if you're not on a variable refresh rate display, is to set your monitor to a custom resolution and frame rate. You could set your monitor to 50 Hertz, for example, and try targeting 50 Hertz rather than 60. And that way you avoid the screen tearing issues and can lock in your monitor's native refresh rate. So it is looking like this scene is significantly easier to render than the one we were just in the boat, so that's nice. So I think this would be a different scene that we could compare. Look at the details in the grass and such, because I think that's where, if I, again, go back to native settings, I mean native resolution, we're probably going to notice that the details in the grass, yeah, and the foliage do look a lot sharper at 100% resolution scale. We're not quite to 60 FPS in this scene with the 100% resolution scale, even on the low settings. So that's a little bit disappointing. I'm curious if we go down to maybe a 90% res scale at the low settings, if we could lock into 60. It looks like we can in this scene. I can see a bit of a fuzzing to the grass, and also with the unstable camera, there's a little bit of a shake to it. That kind of makes it worse as far as the blurring on the temporal resolutions upscaler that it's trying to do there. So yeah, that's a little bit disappointing. Okay, well, let's go back to original settings, and let's go back to native res. So original settings at native res, give it a second to build the textures back in and everything. Yeah, gotta say I am a little bit disappointed here. I'm hoping other areas of the game would be easier to run. Now, another thing you might do is if you want to target, console level performance, which was 30 FPS, I think it's also going to be worth us trying turning the settings up. How much better can we make this look? Let's go up to the high settings. I haven't mentioned VRAM yet, but even going up to the high settings, it looks like we're still under 5 gigabytes of VRAM usage, which is good. I can immediately tell that the shadows seem better at the high setting. That's the main thing I'm noticing here, is the shadows look better to me. I also think this puddle reflection might be a bit nicer than it was at the original settings. Our frame rate is over 30 FPS, so if you were looking to lock 30 FPS at your console-like experience, let's even try out going up to ultra settings. Once again, the shadows, I think going from high to ultra, do look significantly better, but we are now below 30 FPS. So it's looking like the ultra settings are going to be off the table. I don't think I would consider that a playable frame rate. So I think high settings, if you want to target a console-like experience, we get a big boost going down from ultra to high. That's a significant difference, especially percentage-wise. Going from the upper 20s to the upper 30s is a huge difference. So I think my recommended settings in this game are either to go with high settings and just tolerate a console-like experience, maybe lock to 30. There is a frame rate limiter in this game. So you could lock to 30 frames per second, especially if you don't have a variable refresh rate monitor. You could use the FPS limiter to 30. And I think that alternatively, using the original graphics, we are going to be pretty good if you're on a variable refresh rate monitor. And if you wanted to, you could go with the original graphics setting and a small render scale. I wouldn't go as far as FSR does, but like a 90% res scale. It's looking like you'd be able to maybe hit a 50 FPS target if you wanted to lock a custom monitor, hertz in your display settings. All right, guys, I'm going to test out some other GPUs in this game as well, so stay on the lookout for an RX 6600 and RX 6800 XT. And overall, I'm just very happy to see this game on the PC, and it does perform better than a PS4 on the GTX 1060, which is nice. I hope all of you have an excellent day.